Welcome back, y'all. We're going to do chapters 7 to 9 of Fish in a Tree today. Make sure you answer those questions down below on the form, and they'll be due by the end of the day on Monday. All right, here we go. Chapter 7, No Grandpa's Here. I sit on my bed holding my copy of Alice in Wonderland. The shaky writing in the front of the book says, "For Allie, my wondrous girl. Love, Grandpa." The colors of the book are all bright, even though the book is old. Inside, the pages are soft and the writing is bigger than in the books now. But I still can't read it by myself. It's like having a gift that's locked in a glass box. I'm feeling heavy, but I always do on Sunday nights. The thought of another week of school does that. It's like knowing I have to pull a tire through a keyhole the next day. But I'll have a new teacher. A Mr. Daniels sounds like a grandfatherly type with pockets full of lollipops, which could be nice. I'm hoping he'll spend a lot of time straightening his bow tie and telling us about the good old days and not giving us much work. But when I show up, I find that Mr. Daniels is no grandfather. He's younger than Miss Hall. He wears a dark jacket and a tie with colored circles on it. When I get closer, I realize they're planets. Most of the kids are gathered around him. I throw my stuff in the closet and walk over. He says, "My very excellent mother just served us nachos," and claims it is an easy way to memorize the planets in order from the sun. Albert, whose hair reminds me of a bird's nest, stands nearby. I feel bad for Pluto. I look over and my eyes are pulled to the bruises on his arms. Pluto was a planet all those years. Then someone just decided it wasn't anymore. Too small, too far away, orbit not just right. "I don't really think Pluto cares, Albert," I mumble. He sits in his chair and says, "Well, I do." I feel bad for him and want to ask him about the marks. He is big and chunky, but not fat. The kind of size where others would usually leave him alone. I pull out my chair and sit down. Okay, I tell myself. I'm going to do better. I'm going to work harder. That's all I need to do. I'm going to really concentrate this time, even though I know I've tried that and that doesn't work. Reading for me is like when I drop something and my fingers scramble to catch it, and just when I think I've got it, I don't. I try to figure if trying to read helped, I'd be a genius. Mr. Daniels is in front of me. I hold my breath and lean back. He holds out his hand. "I'm Mr. Daniels. Nice to meet you," he says. Shay leans forward towards Jessica. I guess he doesn't know who he's talking to. As usual, most of her friends laugh. "Hey," Mr. Daniels says, turning to her. "That isn't cool. We don't do that in here," which wipes the smile off Shay's face. Then he turns back to me. "What's your name?" "Allie Nickerson," I answer softly, that I can barely hear myself. "Well, are you gonna shake my hand, Allie Nickerson?" he says. "I don't bite on Mondays." "Great. Just what I need. A funny guy for a teacher." I take his hand, but only for a second. Mine is already spinning off, wondering the terrible things that Miss Silver has told him, the plans they've made for me. I see myself wrapped in a robe and lying on the train tracks, just like Grandpa's old black and white silent movies. "Oh, fantastico. Take your seats," he calls. "Time to set the world on fire." Everyone scrambles to their seats, but I'm still lying on the imaginary train tracks, all tied up and watching the engine come around the corner. Chapter 8, Real Trouble. First day with Mr. Daniels starts out okay because we have math in the morning, and Mr. Daniels does this thing he calls the bus driver. He says, "You're the bus driver," and then he tells us how many people get on and off, and we had to add and subtract the numbers in our head. No paper, no pencils, just math. When I was younger, I loved math, everything about math, but in school, math now has letters, like what does X equal? There are also long stories with characters, and although the story is supposed to end with some number and all the words block my path to get there. But the day turns into wooden nickel day at snack time when Mr. Daniel calls me up to his desk. He holds the assignment that I did for Miss Hall, where we had to describe ourselves, the one with Y written all over it. My stomach flops over. "So, I'm wondering what exactly this means. Can you tell me?" he asks. I shrug. "I'm wondering if you can write just one paragraph for me. Something about you. I'd like to learn something about you." I stay quiet. With teachers, if you stay quiet long enough, they start doing the talking for you, filling in the answers, but then you just have to nod. So I wait. But he waits too. Finally, he says, "Come on now. Can you write that paragraph for me?" I feel heavy. "No," I say. He doesn't want to know about the real me. It'll be like people in scary movies who think they want to know what's in the basement, but when they find out, they're always sorry. Allie, did you say no? He asked without being mad. I turn myself to stone. He takes a deep breath and leans forward. So is it writing you don't like? I think about the saying, no, except it could cause me a trouble later. Like the chess game in Grandpa's Alice in Wonderland book. You have to be super sure before you make a final move. But I figure Mr. Daniels probably already knows this about me, so I nod. What do you like then? Buffalo wings, I say. He laughs a little. What do you think about school, or what do you like about school? Leaving. He waits for me to say more. I like math and art, and I like to draw. Oh, well that's cool. Do you draw a lot? Yeah. So do you find that writing difficult, or do you just not like it? It's easy, I lie. It's just boring. Well, maybe we can do some things to make it less boring for you, to excite you about writing. It's a great way to explore, be creative, and ask questions. I point at my paper. I asked lots of questions there. Yes, he laughs. I guess you did. He takes a deep breath. Here's the thing, Allie. I'm going to be honest with you. I've talked with Miss Silver and Miss Hall about you. I know that you spent a lot of time in the office in the past. You're good at getting sent to the office. But you know, you can be good at the wrong things. Uh-oh. I just want you to know that I'm going to try really, really hard not to send you to the office. If we have something to deal with, you and I will deal with it together. He winks. What happens in room 206 stays in room 206. What? So we won't involve Miss Silver anymore? Okay. I think she has enough to do around here. Oh no, did he just take away my get-out-of-jail-free card? Also, he says, moving his head to look at me in the eye, I'm on your side, okay? I want to help you. So he wants to help me, huh? He has no idea what he's in for. Chapter 9, Bag Full of Nothing. Today we're each supposed to bring in something that represents us and tells the class about us. I thought of a few things I could bring, like a can full of dirt or a bag full of nothing. Mr. Daniels asked for volunteers to go first. Shock of the century when Shay raises her hand. She gets up there with a picture of her horse, Diamond. She goes on about how she loves him and goes riding several times a week, but how it's a lot of work to take care of him. So she shows us her riding helmet and fancy jacket too. I guess there really isn't anything that she doesn't have. Jessica brings a picture of Shay and talks about what good friends they are, which I think is funny since we're supposed to talk about ourselves. Oliver bounces up to the front of the room. His feet are never on the floor at the same time. He takes out a light bulb. I am the giver of light. Really? Mr. Daniel asks. Well, my dad is. He sells lamps. And when I grow up, I'm going to be a salesman too. I'm going to sell hangers. Hangers? Mr. Daniels asks. Yes, because I was thinking that it should be something that everyone has, because you'd want to sell stuff that most people need. Because if you sold some stuff that nobody wanted, then you wouldn't sell anything, right? And everybody needs hangers. Mr. Daniel smiles and puts his hand on Oliver's shoulder. Oliver, you are one clever boy. You know that? I haven't been in this class that long, but I'm going to guess that Oliver hasn't heard that said much. He falls into his chair, which chips back, and he grabs his desk, rights himself, and cheers for his own victory. Albert gets up next. As always, he's wearing the shirt with Flint on it and his bruises. He reaches into the brown paper bag and pulls out a jar of clear liquid. He clears his throat. This is a mixture of 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen molecules. Will it explode? Yells Oliver. Albert does not answer. Instead, he unscrews the metal lid and drinks it. Whatever it is. I'm silently freaked out, but Oliver goes nuts. He drank it! Did you see that? He drank molecules! Gross! It is merely water, Albert reports. While Mr. Daniels speaks to Albert, Shay whispers to Jessica, Water? Really? That's all he's got? Shay's gotten even better at being mean, ever since Mr. Daniels kept her in for recess, making fun of Oliver. She saves her comments for when Mr. Daniel is busy talking to someone else. This water was taken from a giant underground lake that goes on for miles and miles, Albert announces. It's the same water that the dinosaurs walked through 100 million years ago and that the caveman drank. It's the same water that the polar bear swam in just last year and medieval knights guzzled after battle. Oliver and most other boys stand, trying to get a better look. That's cool, Albert, Max says. Where'd you get it? Jessica and Shay smile and lean forward. to look at Max. Shay calls out, "Yeah, Albert, where did you get it?" "I got it from my kitchen faucet." "Huh?" "The same water has been here and reused on the earth since it began. It is important to me as being a scientist and a historian. I know that we are but a blip on the Earth's timeline, a grain of sand on an entire beach of time." Kids start to groan. "Here goes Professor again," Max says. "Yeah, such a show-off," Jessica says, turning to Max. "Now knock that off," Mr. Daniel says. "I think Albert's idea is fascinating. How Earth has recycled its water over and over. Extraordinary, Albert." Next, he calls on Keisha. She carries a small box and holds it like whatever is inside will break easily. When she takes out a cupcake, the boys argue about who will get to eat it. "This is a cupcake that I made. It isn't from a box mix. It's homemade." "And why is it important to you?" Mr. Daniels asks. "I like to bake. I told my mom I want to start a business when I get older, and she said there's no time like the present. So this is the first one. I'll show to anyone outside my family." "My God," Shay whispers. "She acts like she's the first to make a cupcake. It's not even decorated or anything." "Shay, please keep your comments constructive," Mr. Daniel says. "Yes, it is plain on the outside," Keisha says, half smiling at Shay. "But it's the inside that matters." Keisha takes a knife out of her box and cuts the cupcake in half and shows us the inside. As you can see, it says "Yum" on the inside. "How'd you do that?" Suki asks, and I'm surprised to hear her talk. She hardly ever says anything. "I'm experimenting with making letters out of different kinds of dough. I stand the letters up in the water cake and the cake. Sorry, guys. I stand the letters up in the cupcake batter and carefully cover them with more batter." "Do you lick the spoon when you're done?" Oliver says. "I like to lick the spoon, but Mom says too much sugar isn't good for me, so she doesn't bake much because—" "Oliver," Mr. Daniel says, pulling his own ear. Oliver stops right away. Then Mr. Daniel looks at the cupcake. "Wow, Keisha, that is pretty impressive. I'm going to call my baking business Hidden Messages. The better way to send a note." "That's fantastic, Keisha," Mr. Daniel says. "The possibilities are infinite." Albert raises his hand and Mr. Daniel points to him. "The possibilities are not, in fact, infinite, as she would eventually run out of appropriate letter combinations, and the number of letters to be used in each cupcake would be limited as well. Also, you imply that the possibilities are all positive, when it's the probable that the possibilities would be equal positive and negative outcomes." "Actually, you're correct," Albert says, Mr. Daniel says, "but I'm an optimist. What can I say?" "So you agree that the possibilities aren't endless?" "Well, I agree from a mathematical standpoint, Albert, but not from a human one. I believe that the things we put numbers on are not necessarily the things that count the most. You can't measure the stuff that makes us human, like Keisha's creativity, or how hard she'll work." Mr. Daniel shrugs. "Just my opinion." "Well, it seems that the part that can be measured is more important," Albert says, "because that's what can be proven." "Well, my fine young fellow, I think we'll have to agree to disagree," Mr. Daniel says, walking by Albert and patting his shoulder. Then Mr. Daniel calls on Suki. She pulls out a tiny paper bag and begins to pass them out to everyone. "I bring 2 foods to share. One is hon senbai, my grandfather's favorite. The other is wasabi peas. They are maybe spicy. Food in America tastes—" She turns to Mr. Daniels. What is correct word?" All of a sudden, Max jumps out and runs to the sink, followed by Keisha and Jessica too. "Too hot!" Max yells. The 3 push each other a bit to try and scoop water into their mouths. "Ah, yes. Bland is the correct word. Food here is bland." She thinks. She seems to think that the other 3 kids at the sink are both funny and odd. "I think how hard it would be to move to a different country and have to learn another language. I can't even handle one." Mr. Daniels laughs, holding that little bumpy bright green pea between his fingers. "They don't look that hot. Most people in the class are too chicken to eat it now, pushing it away." Suki looks a little hurt. Albert puts one in his mouth. He eats it, but looks like he's in pain. His eyes even water. He says with a gasp, "I like it, Suki. Thank you." That Albert is nice. Oliver pops his in his mouth, but has no reaction. "Oliver," Mr. Daniels asks, "you don't think it's hot?" "Nah, I'm the only one in my family that can finish a fireball without taking it out of my mouth. My mother says I have no taste buds at all, and my dad says—" Mr. Oliver pulls on his earlobe again and says, "Thanks, Oliver." Oliver's mouth is open, ready to keep going, but he says, "Thanks, Mr. Daniels." Do they have some signal or something? Suki continues, these foods mean much to me because I share them with my grandfather. Many things about Japan I miss, but my grandfather I most miss. Also, I missed wood carving with him. He would make these wooden blocks, and I carve gift for him and send. That's why she has those blocks. I eat these foods because they remind me of Japan and my grandfather. I feel sad for her. What are the crackers made of? Asks Albert. Suki turns to him. They are made of shrimp and fish bones. It isn't just Oliver who goes wild over that one. Most everyone says, yuck. And Suki looks up at Mr. Daniels, who turns to the class. Now, quiet down. Shrimp and fish bones, Shay asks. We prefer lobster in our family. Albert raises his hand. I would just like to point out that lobster is a very expensive meal now, but in the olden days it was served only to peasants and slaves who revolted and demanded that they only be served lobster twice a week. And, he swallows, I think fish bones would have an excellent nutritional properties. Suki smiles for a second before she scurries back to her seat. Mr. Daniel gives Albert a solid nod. Next, it's my turn. What I ended up bringing in means something to me, but now I'm not sure the class would be nice about it. I decide to play it safe and say I forgot. I can tell Mr. Daniels is disappointed. Well then, do you have a pet you can tell us about, he asks. No, my mom is allergic. This reminds me of my dad crawling around the living room on all fours pretending to be a puppy I begged for. Oliver starts to bark like a dog. Mr. Daniel says, too much of that, Oliver, and we'll be giving you dog biscuits. Better be careful. Mr. Daniel squints at me. Are you sure there's nothing you can show us? Because I have a feeling there's something. I slide my hand down in my pocket and clutch my 1943 steel penny, the object I brought in for sharing today. He watches my hand and realizes I've given myself away. So I stand and I take out the penny. My dad is in the army and he's deployed right now. On the day he left, he gave Travis and me these pennies. I look up at Mr. Daniels. That's my big brother. He nods. In 1943, pennies looked weird because they were silver and the color like quarters. They were made of steel instead of copper because the government needed copper to make ammunition during World War II. Then, in 1944, the pennies went back to their usual red copper color. Anyway, I think it's cool. I do too, Mr. Daniels says, and I think it's even more cool that you told us about it. So I walk back to my seat. I think of how when Dad left, he said that when we look at the steel pennies, we need to remember that we are unique too, and also that things will go back to normal for us. Then he'll be home before we know it. I really miss him. Mr. Daniels gives Oliver a thumbs up, and I think how cool it is that they have the ear pulling signal. That way he doesn't have to tell Oliver that he's doing something wrong in front of everybody. I know what that feels like, and I'm happy Mr. Daniels cares so much. Most teachers seem to like their students to be all the same, perfect and quiet. Mr. Daniels actually seems to like it that we're different. Alright, that's where we're going to end today. Make sure you answer all the questions. Use complete sentences, please. And I'll see y'all tomorrow.